are you anybody? To me. You can still stay friendly with me after I do my work. Great. But don't expect me to become your personal secretary. I can lose who I am and get into your story, and I can listen to your story for hours and hours and hours. I'm not there to kiss Barbra Streisand on the lips. I'm there to find her brain. No. He says, not yet. He said, we're not ready to do that. I said, Al, we're just going to do it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to just turn it on, and we're just going to go from here. That's the way it works.
Honored to have you here.
I'm honored to be there, and I have been to your country and I have loved it.
Let's try and understand your story. Who is Lawrence Grobel?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I lived there for 9 years and probably got my sense of street smarts on the streets of New York and Brooklyn. I then left to go to Jericho, Long Island. There, it was a very different experience. There was a great freedom that I had growing up. One of my friends was named Paul, singer, and his father was a very famous artist. He was a bird artist. He did wildlife. And I used to go to his house and watch Arthur Singer, who did the book Birds of the World, who did the book on the United States stamps. There was 50 different birds, and he drew them all. But I got to watch him do it. And he smoked his pipe and he drew, and was so opposite of anything I saw. My father went to work. He was in the pharmaceutical business. I'd like to live a life where I stayed home and did my own stuff rather than have to work for somebody else. I had a piano teacher as well when I was 10 years old. His name was Ted Harris. And I've written about these people in my book, You Show Me Yours. It's my memoir. But, who were the people who influenced me? Well, Ted Harris was a composer, but he never made it. He did one or two songs actually got made. But other than that, he had like thousands of sonatas and operas and different things he wrote that never got done, but it didn't matter. My mother would pay $5 for an hour piano lesson. Well, my sister continued taking lessons. I stopped after a year or two because I wasn't very good, but I loved this man. And my sister continued. And when my sister had a child, she hired Ted to come teach her child. This is how many years later. He said, it's still $5 an hour. And she says, Ted, you can't live on that kind of money. He says, it'll never be different. I mean, money didn't mean anything to him. He had a different attitude towards life. And I loved his attitude. And it helped me because I have never done anything for money. When I teach students, when I talk to them, and it's about, if you want to be a writer, don't look for fame and fortune. Look inside. You want to satisfy yourself. You want to feel good about yourself. For me, it's writing. One summer, I got to New York. The day I arrived, my friend calls me who says that James Meredith, who was a black activist, he was actually trying to integrate a school, I think. He got shot. He didn't get killed, but he got shot in Mississippi. And they're organizing a march, and Martin Luther King is going to be there and all that stuff. And he said, we have to go. We have to go. I said, you're right. So we went down there. Now, my mother and father, I had arrived that one day. The next day, I'm leaving to go on a civil rights march. At that time was dangerous. People were shooting at people. So my parents said, if you go, you can't come home, blah, blah, blah. Just doing what parents do because they were concerned. And I said, Mom, this is history. I have to go. I was very young at the time. I was like 19. Right. So we went down there and we marched for, 15 miles a day or whatever. It was very hot. We had to have salt pills. And I wrote about it for the newspaper. I had won an essay contest in high school. And that I got to meet Bobby Kennedy when he was Attorney General. and I got to meet the head of the FBI and all these people in Washington. It was a very big deal. Newsday was the sponsor of that essay contest. So when I went back to Newsday and I said, I'm going down to Mississippi, and there were no reporters then. They wouldn't allow reporters on the march, so different from today.
Right.
But every time we'd hit a town, I would get on the phone and I'd call Newsday and I'd tell them what was going on, and then it would get in the paper. I didn't get paid for that, but I was like, a spy, like a reporting spy. Yeah. The Vietnam War was a very big deal for all of us at that age. I knew that I would not go in the army. I would rather go to jail, or I would rather go to Canada if I had to. I applied for the Peace Corps. I got in, and I ended up going to Africa, to Ghana, and I spent 3 years in Africa, and very important years, really, because I was teaching at the Ghana Institute of Journalism. All of my students were older than I was. They were, some of them were, they had 10 wives. I was very nervous. I didn't know really how to teach. I was learning as I was doing it. I got a great appreciation from my former teachers from just doing this. But I liked it there. I wrote a lot. And I ended up staying a third year. And when I got back to New York, all I wanted to do was write. So I went to Newsday, the newspaper, and I said, I talked to the editor of a new magazine there, and he says, well, do you like, do you know anything about airplane? Do you like to do research? I said, not really, but I can do it. He says, well, we're thinking of doing a magazine section just on the history of aviation on Long Island. Okay. I said, I'll do it. Nothing about it, but I agreed. And he gave me the assignment, which was amazing. And I went away, and for the next 3 weeks, I did all this research. I contacted people who flew out in 1920s and flew with Lindbergh, and incredible kinds of stories. Because almost everything happened in aviation. So much happened on Long Island. And then I started doing all kinds of stories. I did a story on martial arts, on karate, and I did another one on transcendental meditation. And every time I did a story, I got involved in that story. Right. And then I said, maybe I could write something for the New York Times. So I went there. I said, I suggested a couple of articles to them. They agreed. So little by little, I was building up my portfolio. I was writing these stories. I was getting bylines. And then I decided I just want to really write fiction. I want to write novels and stuff. So a friend of mine became the director of Antioch College West, which is basically Antioch College is in Yellow Springs, Ohio. But they opened up these branch in Los Angeles, and he was the director, and he knew who I was, and he said, Larry, why don't you become my assistant director? I said, I don't want to do that. I want to just write. He says, well, you'll help me. I need to get it started. I like the way you think, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I agreed. I went to Los Angeles, and I did this, for half. I said, I'll only work part-time because I want to write. So I did that. I started working for part-time there. And then and as soon as I got to Los Angeles, I got an apartment, I get a call from Newsday, and the editor there says, we've come up with a way to get stories off of Long Island, interviews with household names. I said, really? I said, okay, well, who you have in mind? He says, we want you to try to interview Mae West. Now, Mae West was a very big movie star in the 30s and 40s. And, but she was still alive. And she had just made a movie called Myra Breckenridge. She was like 80 years old. And so I found her. I was able to get to her, and that was my first celebrity interview. As soon as they published it, and they said, "Oh, they liked it." They said, I said, "Can I do anybody?" They said, "Anybody that we recognize." I said, "How about Linus Pauling?" Linus Pauling was a scientist who won 2 Nobel Prizes. One was for peace, and one was for science. And they said, "Okay." Then I said, "How about Henry Moore, the artist? He lived in England." They said, "Okay." And then I said, this is great. So I started interviewing all these different people. But then what happened is household names are really famous people, and you only have a handful of artists and writers that are famous, and that recognize. Right. Who are the famous people? your television stars, your movie stars. So that's what I ended up, seeing. I saw Jane Fonda, Lucille Ball, Warren Beatty. I started just talking to a lot of these famous people. I would sweat, perspire, as I'm talking to them, and I'm trying to not, trying to get them to talk. I only prepared like 30 questions. As I started talking to these people, I said, what would it be like to really interview them, to really spend more time with them? I only got 2 or 3 hours with them because I only needed that much time to do these interviews for Newsday. But then I thought, what if I could do an interview for Playboy? Playboy did these 10,000 word, 12,000 word interviews. They were long. And I remember reading them when I was a kid with Allen Ginsberg. I remember how serious they were and deep. So how would I get into Playboy? That was really my quest. And I said, well, why don't I try to interview Hugh Hefner for Newsday and impress him? And if he likes it, maybe I'll be able to sneak my way into Playboy. And that's what happened. I interviewed him. He said he'll give me an hour. I ended up spending 2 days with him, 8 hours. And when the piece got published, he liked it so much that he didn't. Every year he went to the Playboy Club, and there was like 2,000 or 3,000 people that came who were advertisers from all around the country who advertised in Playboy, and he would always give a speech. That year, my article came out. He said he decided he's not going to give the speech. He's just going to hand out my article about what he believed. And the publicist told me that. And he said, would you like to come to that event? The editor of Playboy was going to be there. I said, I'll be there. And I took my portfolio with me of all the articles I had done. And he brings the guy over to me, Arthur Kretschmer. And I said, Mr. Kretschmer, I said, this is what I do. And how can I do this for Playboy? And because, Playboy only does 12 interviews a year, and they already have their interviewers. And I'm a kid still, I'm still pretty young. I'm in my early 20s. So he said, well, the interview editor is Barry Golson, his name was, and he says, give him a call. And I did. I called right that day. I said, Arthur Kretschmer told me to call you. And he says, well, who are you working on? So I was working on about 12 different people trying to get to. And one of them was Barbra Streisand. He says, we've been after Barbra Streisand for years. Nobody can get to her. But if you can get to her, we'll be interested.
Wow.
I called Streisand's publicist and I said, look, I know I've been trying to get you for Newsday, and that's syndicated in 350 magazines. But now Playboy won. That goes to 15 magazines around the world in all these languages. If she talks to me, she doesn't have to ever talk to anybody else. It'll be one shot for her. It took about 6 months or 8 months for Barbara to finally come around to saying, okay, she'll do it. And so I get a call saying Barbra Streisand wants to meet you. I went to see her. She was making the movie A Star Is Born at the time. And long story short, I did get to interview her. And that interview led to me, it took 9 months. I didn't get, because I had told Barbara one thing. I said, I won't hand the interview in until you agree that we're done. Wow. Now, with anybody else I have ever talked to, we would have been done that day in the conversation. Barbara was different. Barbara was obsessed with getting it right in her mind. And so I ended up spending almost 9 months with her. I would see her twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. We fought a lot. Her boyfriend at the time, John Peters, tried to buy it from me. He tried to pay me off. We had a big fight. He wanted to actually fist fight with me, and I didn't, of course. But it was a crazy time. And again, I wrote a whole chapter in my memoir on my dealing with this because it's really interesting. And this is all behind the scenes stuff with Barbara. So, but anyway, it came out, and she ends up being on the cover of Playboy. It was the first celebrity ever to be on the cover of Playboy. And what I proved to Playboy was that I was persistent and that I didn't give up. And I didn't get paid until it was published. So I worked for free, basically, all that time. But I knew how important it was. And sure enough, after that came out, I also did Dolly Parton. And when they, and then they said, they called me up one day and they said, Marlon Brando has agreed to do an interview.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take you more time than it took Streisand. He's really a difficult person.
Right.
You want it? I said, "Are you kidding?" Marlon Brando, absolutely. So it took me about 17 months total with Marlon Brando to finally make it happen after he agreed. And then I went to his island, and I spent 10 days alone with Marlon Brando. Did this interview, came back. And that became.
I remember reading in your book that he wasn't even comfortable with the tape recorder being switched on initially.
Right. He didn't let me turn on the tape recorder for 3 days. For the first 3 days I was there, I would have my tape recorder. He says, "No, we can talk." And I kept saying, and we would go for walks, and he would tell me stories about The Godfather and Mafia and this. And I said, Marlon, these are great stories. Can we hold off? I'll remember it. But I knew by then that nobody tells the same story the same way the second time. Yes. The first time is the better time, the more detail. So I ended up for the first 3 days on the island with Brando, telling him all of my life story, what I've been telling you, but in much greater detail. I would tell him all these stories about Africa and witches and, ghost stories and, things that happen all over. And, finally, on the fourth day, I took the tape recorder with me, and we were sitting outside his bungalow. And I didn't ask. I didn't hide it. I just put the tape recorder in the sand between us, and I turned it on, and we just started to talk. And that's what happened. And for 6 hours that day, 6 hours the next day, and for the next 5 days, I was there 10 days, about 5 days more. We talked 6 hours a day, and I got the interview. And I'm still working on that thing. I mean, I wrote a screenplay based on it, and I'm still trying to get that screenplay made, and I keep rewriting it. So it's been many years since then to do it. But it's 40 years already, and I'm still trying to get a movie made about my time with Marlon Brando. But that's really how it started. After Brando is when I became, I guess, a little bit famous in the journalistic world, because that was when I found that anybody I ever wanted to interview would say yes, because I was the person who did Brando. And I learned that with Al Pacino. When Al Pacino agreed he had never done an in-depth interview before. And when they finally got Pacino to do it, I was working on Steve Martin at the time for Playboy. And they called me up and they said, we need you to do Pacino. He says, "Can you come to New York on Thursday?" This was a Tuesday. A Wednesday, the Academy Library was closed, and that's where I went to do my research. I wasn't on Google and the internet yet. So I said, "I can't go that fast." I said, "I'm not ready. I have to prepare. And plus, I'm seeing Steve Martin." And they said, "You don't understand." He says, "Pacino said he'll do the interview, but only with the guy who interviewed Brando." He didn't know my name, but that's who I became, the guy who interviewed Brando. And so I said, "Okay, can you pay me more money then?" And they agreed. And that's how my reputation became established, because Pacino was obsessed with Brando. He used to carry around the interview that I did in Playboy in his back pocket. And he would just read it all the time. He would just love what Brando was talking about and what have you. And so finally, when I put the book out on my conversation with Brando, I said, "Here, Al, you don't have to carry that raggedy," because he kept losing it. He says, "You can give me another copy of the interview." So now I had the book, and that book is still out. I mean, I got the rights back to it, so it's because it was published by different places. So I put it out, and it's on Amazon as well. But all these interviews with Pacino, with Brando, with James Michener, Truman Capote, Ava Gardner, and Robert Evans. Those are my interview books, that I've done. And based on basically the initial Playboy interview, or first a magazine interview that I did for Movie Line with Robert Evans, those things became, my books. So that's that gets you up to my interviewing life.
What really helped you build that trust and connection with the people?
It's hard to answer it because it sounds like you're not being very modest about things. But I think the real answer to that is just personality. I think that people recognize something in me when I meet them that lets them know rather quickly, that I'm prepared. Very important, because I am prepared. I never go into an interview where I haven't really prepared, and when I have, it's a disaster. Even in my stage of life, I feel very uncomfortable not being prepared. But I'm sincere. I'm not out for gossip. I'm not out to hurt you. But I'm also out to be very fair. I'm going to do an interview. If it's an in-depth interview, it's going to cover a lot of material. So I know that you're going to have to trust me.
Yeah.
And if you don't trust me, then it's not going to we're only going to have one day together.
Right.
If you trust me, I'm going to probably somewhere along the first day say to you, can I come back tomorrow? Can we work? Can we talk on the phone once in a while? Can we do? And so I think a lot of it is in the very first meeting. What's in the eyes? When you meet somebody the first time. When the first time I met Warren Beatty, extraordinarily reclusive. He never does interviews. I was surprised he agreed to see me, and this was before I did Playboy. This was for Newsday. I went to he had a penthouse, 2-bedroom penthouse in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. And I went up there, and I was wearing my African clothing, because at that time I was still comfortable wearing these long African dress, and it looked crazy, for most people. But these people, when they're talking to journalists, they're used to seeing someone in a jacket or a tie, or here I come looking like a complete buffoon. But I was comfortable with myself, because that's the clothes I was comfortable with. And I remember when Warren Beatty opened the door, I just looked at him, and I was very young, and I pointed my finger at him, and I went, Warren. He just looked at me, and he says, come in. And we just started talking, It was just, that happened. With Pacino, the same thing. Pacino was a virgin when it comes to interviewing. He really had never talked to him. And he was so nervous. But because I had been with Brando, I'd had that experience where I let Brando say, you can't use the tape recorder for 3 days. And I was very frustrated. I said, I'm not going to let that happen again. So the very minute I walked into Al's place, I put my bag down. I took the tape recorder out, and he goes, no. He says, not yet. He says, we're not ready to do that. I said, Al, we're just going to do it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to just turn it on, and we're just going to go from here. That's the way it works. And, okay, he said. I took control. That was a very important thing. It's very important to be in control of the interview, not to let the person dictate you, because if it happens right at the beginning, you're finished. You've established the power. Right. And if you give them the power, you lose the power, and then you're at their whim. And, that happens sometimes. Sometimes you can't help it. But, with Meryl Streep, I interviewed her when she was making a movie called Death Becomes Her. And she was in the makeup chair at 6:00 in the morning getting ready. And that's where I'm talking to her. So the person making her up is right there. When we got to John Cazales, who was her boyfriend who died, now she'd married somebody else, and I'm bringing him up. And so it was emotional for her to talk about that. But I knew I had to get some of the stuff to talk about. Right. But so when she was called to the set, she said to me, okay, Larry, why don't you come back tomorrow? I'll give you a call. I said, okay. I didn't get her phone number. She never called. Oh. So I ended up I had enough material for a cover story for Movie Line. It would have been a good interview for Playboy. It wouldn't have been long enough. But, I learned, I said, I didn't have control of that one. There was nothing I could do. Right. So that happened. Jake Gyllenhaal, that happened too. They only wanted to give me 20 minutes. He was making the Prince of Persia. He was advertising, and he had a New York Times reporter coming after him and a Wall Street Journal. So they only had a segment at a time. And I didn't know that until I got there. And I just said, this is not working. I said, this doesn't work. And I told him that. I said, look, Jake, why talk to me for a few minutes and we won't get that much done? It won't be good for you. I spent 5 of my 20 minutes with him trying to talk him into a longer thing. And he would just say, well, that's what you got. I mean, it was like that kind of thing. So I had to just really I ended up getting another 10 or 15 minutes, but not much more. And I ended up writing a thing, my 20 minutes with Jake Gyllenhaal. I mean, I that became part of what the story was. But I didn't have control. The publicist was there, and they were kicking me out. I hate those situations. I won't go on, when they have these trips for journalists, the junkets kind of thing, where you get to talk to a star for a certain period of time, and everybody has a different. I'll never do that. I mean, I just I need a lot of time. I need to be alone with you. If I need to, if it's in the evening, that's great. I'll go into 3 a.m. with you, like I did with Dolly Parton or whatever, or Joan Collins. It just, you want to make it as intimate as you can. The answers to why me, it's you're getting to know me now. That's the answer is who I am, and it's always different. I've had a number of Playboy interviewers come talk to me about what we do, and some of them. I remember one guy was really nervous. He came to my house. And he says, well, how do you do this? Hey, and he was sweating, and he would take my napkin and wipe his forehead. Well, and what I ended up doing was feeling sorry for him. So I would tell him more and more stuff. And then I thought about it. I said, that's his technique.
Right.
His technique is, and not that he's doing it on purpose, but that's who he is. I felt so sorry for the guy. I gave him material. I gave him whatever I could. Other people you may get offended by him. I just have a guy who just wrote a book called Big Talk or something, and he asked me, can I write a blurb about his book? And I looked at the book, and he's got pictures where he does TV interviews, I guess, and when the stars come on, he has pictures kissing these stars on the lips, and I thought, who does that? You know what I mean? I'm not there to kiss Barbra Streisand on the lips. I'm there to find her brain. Right. So I wrote a nasty blurb, and he got very upset with me. He says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought maybe we could be friends." And then I felt bad, right? I felt bad that I did that. I said, "Okay, I'll give you something else." I said, "I'm sorry. I just reacted to that." So, but I think, my advice to, people who want to do this is, if you have a very large ego, it's not going to work. I have friends who are, they think they're stars in their own right, whatever they do, but they have big egos. They cannot sublimate their egos to someone else. And, I find that you have to be able to do that. I feel that, I can lose who I am and get into your story, and I can listen to your story for hours and hours and hours without saying, me too. Right. But if you say something that I can relate to, I will tell you a story. Your personality and your ability to not try to show that you're any sense superior to anybody. You're there to, I mean, a lot of actors, I know I'm smarter than them educationally, I mean, a lot of them didn't go to college. A lot of them, dropped out of high school, but they had their own experiences that are different. And of course, I remember when I was with Charlie Sheen, and I'm looking, he's driving a new Mercedes and I'm driving an old Fiat Spider, and I'm thinking, how did he get that? And I got this, but that's the way it is, I mean, he's the one who's recognized, and he's, I was once with Elliot Gould and Rita Moreno in front of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. Elliot had become a friend, and we were walking outside, and Rita was there, and he goes over to say hello to Rita, but the paparazzi were there. And at that time, paparazzi was still dressed in tuxedos. And they were, yeah, can we get a picture with? And then I was standing there, and one of the photographers said, "Are you anybody?" to me. I said, "No, I'm not. I'm nobody. Could you mind stepping away?" Okay, and I stepped away from the picture, right? And that's, what I saw. That it was the world wants to see the people they recognize. They don't want to see the people behind the scenes, and that's fine. It didn't bother me whatsoever. If it bothers you, you're in the wrong business. You want to be on that side of the camera.
Also, sir, these people have shared some very dark moments of their lives with you. When if you had to suggest these other young journalists or other reporters, where do we really draw that line?
If you are talking to someone whose father committed suicide or his mother beat them, those are not easy things to ask, but they are important things to ask because it'll explain who they are, where they come from, and that's what your job is. Now, you may have to ask something more general. What do you think about child abuse? What do you think? Something like that. Halle Berry's father at the dinner table once picked up their little Maltese dog, and he threw the dog against the wall. He would beat his mother, the wife, as well. But she told me that story, and it was horrifying. But had I not asked about what was it like growing up, and what kind of violence, how violent was your dad, and she tells this story, I never would have known that story myself. Some things you just have to find out about, and when you hear it, you don't stop it. You know what I mean? You let them talk, let them cry, let them get emotional. Elizabeth Shue's brother, they used to have a pond, like a lake, where the children would all go and they would swing on ropes. And her brother, when they were older, went back to the lake, and he got on the rope and he swung out and he landed on a tree, and he died. He died that way. That's not an easy thing to talk to about. And the same thing with James Garner. James Garner, the actor, told me that his stepmother, his father married this woman who was a terrible witch, and she used to make him dress up, put on a dress, go to the store. And he got so mad at her one time that he actually attacked her. He actually was choking her. And the father came, and the brother, and they grabbed him. And he knew that he said, if I let go of that woman, she would have killed me. So, but they put him away. But the father soon divorced the woman. He realized that, she was a bad woman. But for him to tell me that story in that kind of detail, I knew that was the main crux of my interview. But how to get it? You don't get those stories on the first day or the first hour, or it sometimes takes a long time to get to that place. And that's, again, because you've built up trust over the times you do. The tough part of journalism today is you don't get that much time with a subject. You're in and out. So you have to, Sophia Loren, I once could have interviewed Sophia Loren, the Playboy, but they only said I could do 2 hours a day for 3 days in New York. And then she was going back to Italy. I said, well, could I go back to Italy with her? She said, no, she's doing a movie then. And I said, well, maybe I can get a little more time when I'm with her. No, because she's got something that a half hour before you, an hour after you. So, that was it, 6 hours. I turned it down. I turned it down because I said, that's not enough time. Today, if somebody offers you 6 hours with anybody, that's amazing. You'll grab it in a minute. And I would grab it in a minute if I was doing, something like that, because I know that, you don't get that kind of time anymore. I was very lucky to be able to interview people at a time when people understood that to tell your story correctly, you need time. It does take time. And I was good at listening and preparing. For James Michener, when I went to see James Michener, who wrote 50 books, many of them over 1,000 pages each, and I read a lot of them, he said, I prepared a great deal. And the first day I got there, it was in Florida, and he said, well, we'll sit in my office. He says, he said, come tomorrow, we'll start tomorrow, and I'll give you the day. And I said, Mr. Michener, I said, I think I may need more than 1 day with you. I said, I prepared a lot. And he says, well, let's just see how it goes. I said, well, I prepared 560 questions. I said, it's good. And he looked at me like, what? Okay, so I came at 8 a.m. We broke for lunch. We had lunch together. We went out, then we came back. We talked till 8 p.m. He says, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Same thing, 8 a.m, 12, see you the next day. 5 days, 8 hours, 10, 12 hours a day for 5 days I did with him. And then I continued with him because I did the book called Conversations with Michener. I continued talking to him for 17 years. 17 years. I kept talking to him, and then when he died, I put it out as a book. So you just never know with these things, but you have to. But when you're just asking me, when do you stop yourself? You don't stop yourself. They will stop you. When you get to an area that's too sensitive, they're going to say to you, I'd rather not talk about it, or I don't want to go there. John Huston said that to me on camera when I did a Playboy cable interview with him. I already knew some of his story because I was working with him, I did a Playboy interview, but this was the cable. I brought up when he lost the child. I brought up a certain woman he had divorced, and he said, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. I said, okay. And I moved on. But when I wrote the book on the Hustons, I went there with him, and I went in depth with him on everything. So, sometimes it's just the right time, and depending on what you're doing. If you're doing a TV thing, if you're doing a magazine piece, or if you're doing a book, you're going to get different kinds of responses and go in deeply in different ways.
Right. And sir, since we are talking about this, what really makes a good interview? You also stress a lot upon the importance of editing, the role of editing in your book, The Art of Interview. How would you describe that to us?
Well, editing is essential. I mean, there are times I've talked to young journalists, in school, and they'll say, they're shocked when I say, well, you can maneuver the material. No, it has to be the way. I said, look, I'll bring in my 2,000 pages of transcript of the first interview I did with Al Pacino for Playboy. 2,000 pages. It's this much.
Yeah.
I said, how do you turn that into an article? If there's no way I can just give it to you. I have to edit it. So what I do is I index, when I have that much material. So everything he says about his mother, that's pages 2, 12, 100, and 300. I'll take those pages. And when I ask him, tell me about your mother, I will move those answers to one thing. Then I will shape it, and to make it. So my interviews always make people sound better than they are. That's just the nature of it. But editing is a whole other topic, really. It's worthy of a book, but I do give some examples in my Art of the Interview of editing, where I show you a larger piece and how I cut it down into something smaller. To me, editing is crucial to making a good interview. But what I look for is, I try to make sure I've read everything I can about that person. If it's a writer, most of their books, or at least the major books. If it's a actor, I'd like to see everything they've acted in. If it's a scientist, I try to understand their science, but it's not always so easy. Yeah. But whatever it is, I do my best homework, to get ready. And then what I'm trying to do is get you to tell me something that I haven't heard or read or seen before. I'm looking for something new, because if it's not new, then we're just rehashing old stuff. We're rehashing things that you could find out anyway. If you want, by interviewing me, you can Google my name and you can come up with a whole bunch of things that I've done in the past, or said in the past. You can go to my books. You can read about that stuff. So there's a whole bunch you can do. What can I say to you or to your audience that I have never said before? That's your challenge, not mine to give you, but it's your challenge to get. Elliott Gould, the actor, was the one who really taught me that very early on. And it was really, he was late for the first time we ever interviewed, I ever met him. He was late in his own house. I'm alone in his house at night. The publicist was there with me, and then he left, and Elliot was gone, and he finally comes and he starts talking, he's acting a little bit weird. I guess he was stoned, and whatever. And I'm just trying to talk to him. And I'm from Brooklyn and he's from Brooklyn. And I would say, I said, Elliot, you and I were both from Brooklyn. And he would say, information. And then I'd say, I know that you did some child commercials for chocolate syrup. Information. And then I would say, well, when you were married to Barbra Streisand, well, that's information. and I didn't know what to do, you know. And he kept saying information. And then I realized what he was saying was, I was asking him stuff that anybody knew. I wasn't challenging him. I wasn't interesting him. And I finally, and I didn't realize it at the time. I said to him, well, Elliot, I don't think this is working out. I said, so maybe I should come back on another time. And he said, we're talking, man. We're talking. Ask me questions. And I said, oh, okay. He's not kicking me out, but he's not making it easy. Yeah. And I have loved him for that. I have dedicated one of my books. I think it's my book of poetry or something. My Madonna Paints a Mustache, to him. Mm-hmm. And you know, I actually used him as the example of the character in my first novel, Catch a Falling Star. Really, it's Elliot, you know, in a way, you know, it's that there's something about him, you know, his character, his nature, the way he talked, that fascinated me. But I talked to him 2 days ago. You know, I mean, he got my new book on, you know, the schemers, dreamers, cheaters, and believers, whatever. And, you know, and he's reading it. And I said, well, I owe him for my career in a way, just from him doing that. Because most people wouldn't say information. They'd give you the answer. Yeah, I was in Brooklyn. Yeah, and it would be dull. It would be boring. Right. What makes a good interview is that it's not dull or boring. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really an answer, because, you know, when I look at somebody's interview, I don't care if it's Playboy or anyplace else. If you don't catch me in the first 2 questions and answers, I don't finish. I don't go on with it, because I'm already, you know, you have to catch the person in the beginning. It's like catching a fish in a way. You're pulling him in, and then you got to keep pulling, keep making it. You want every answer to your question. Your question can be banal, doesn't matter, but the answer has to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And now, sir, help me understand this. Al Pacino as a friend, Al Pacino as a journalist. How has that journey been for you?
Very tough. No, I mean, because Al Pacino, when I first met him, I identified with him in a different way, because I was in his apartment and he had an old chair that I sat down in. It was a wicker chair, and I broke it. You know, I sat right through the wicker chair, and I said, what kind of chair is this? You know, I wasn't that heavy. And then he had a cup of yogurt that was on the couch, and it was moldy. There was just still yogurt, you know, sitting on the arm of the couch. And he had cookies that were on the top of the refrigerator. I remember one time I walked into, it was a very small apartment. I walked in by myself. He was in the other room, and I thought, I'll take a cookie, right? So I went to the top. I looked down. Every cookie had a bite in it. Every single one. So right? So I put it back. Who does that? Who eats a half a cookie that doesn't eat the other half? So, but everything he did, you know, he would say, you want a cup of coffee? I said, okay. He would go in to boil the water, and the dish rag caught on fire from the stove, and then he's doing this, and he's waving his arm, you know, trying to put the fire out. And I'm looking at him, and he made me laugh. I said, you know, he's a buffoon. You know, this is the Godfather. This is, you know, Don Corleone. And then he's crazy. You know, I said, this is like a guy I grew up with in the streets in a way, and that's how, you know, I was with him. And we started, because we hit it off like that, we became friendly. And the interview, when it was published and after it came out, he would say, well, I remember when it was finished, took a long time. He said, you're going to leave me now? You're just going to leave me? He says, you've been talking to me all this time. Now you're just going to leave? I said, I got to do that. I said, look, Al, after the article comes out, if you like it, we can stay friendly. You may not like it. You may not want to ever talk to me again. Came out. He thought it was fine. And Rolling Stone asked me to interview him. I went, you know, so different magazines asked me over the years, and I did it. But the more I saw him, the closer we became. And then we continued talking on the phone, and we would talk on the phone for hours. I mean, you know, it was just like, I knew his whole life. I knew the women he was with, how he felt with them. He would come here with Kathleen Quinlan or whoever he was seeing at the time, you know, Diane Keaton. We used to go play Pictionary together, and, you know, whatever. And so, you know, when my kids were born, Al was, sending presents and flowers, and he on my kids' birthdays he would, give them little earrings or whatever it would be. I remember when the kids were small, he gave them an elaborate, what do you call it, gerbil set, with a little, and so, hamster set, I guess. So, but that just evolved. That was rare. I mean, my relationship with Elliot was like that. My relationship with Al was like that. Very close. And it got to a point where, Al would give me all the scripts he was going to read. He says, read it. He'd ask me to comment on it and give me thought. So I would go to his house, and if he was upstairs in the bedroom, I would just go right up. It wasn't like I had to wait downstairs. If he was in the bath, he'd say, Larry, come in, we'll talk. And I'd sit on the toilet and he'd sit in the bathtub and we're talking. This is not a normal journalist relationship. Yes. This has become a friendship. We would, sometimes he'd watch TV in his bedroom, we would both be on the bed. And this is not like a gay situation. I'm saying, we knew our boundaries, but just like we were brothers, it was like we were just close. I felt I could go into his kitchen. I could open the freezer. I could take out ice cream. I could take out cake. Whatever was there, I could eat it. I didn't have to ask anybody. And everybody knew that I was okay to do that. We played paddle tennis all the time, and I would beat him as much as I could. He beat me in chess. We played chess a lot. He had a swimming pool. We would swim, so, sometimes I'd go there and he was getting a haircut. It was he says, you want a haircut? I said, no, I don't. He says, come on, let me treat you to a haircut. $200 he would pay the guy to cut hair. I paid $10, but the guy cut my hair, and I said, okay, didn't look any different to me, but okay, but it was like, it was just one of those situations. Now, that went on for over 30 years. But then what happened is he asked me to be in his movie, Salomé. At that time it was called Salomé. It became Wilde Salomé. And we went, just Al and I, we flew to first class to Europe. We went to London and England, and Dublin, London, Paris. And we, following Oscar Wilde's trail and all. And being filmed the whole time. Everything we do is there's a camera on us, and we're walking through the museums, whatever. What am I doing there? This is about King Herod. This is during this time of Christ. What am I doing there? Well, I'm there. He says, I just need you around. Just keep asking me questions, and we'll figure it out. I said, well, it turns out if you see the movie, you see I'm his biographer, basically. I'm there to do a biography of this whole thing. So I said, if I'm going to do that, I might as well write a book about it. He said, fine. So I did. And every time he would say to me, are you going to do a job on me? Are you going to, hurt me? And I said, why would I do that? I said, we're friends. I said, I'm not going to hurt you. This is just it's an insight into the making of the movie. Well, when I saw the cut of the movie, the first cut was 3.5 hours long, and I was in it a lot. I was in it like 40 or 50 times. I said, wow, but then as he cut it down and down and down to a 90-minute movie, I get cut out of almost all of it. I'm still there, but I think I talked twice. Where before I was like, we were talking on the plane, we're talking on the train, all this stuff. When I got a contract. I got a publisher who wanted to publish the book, and I knew it takes a year to publish a book. Now it takes 10 minutes, but at that time it was. And I told him, I said, Al, I have a publisher. They want to do it. He says, no, you can't publish a book yet. The movie's not out. I said, no, it's going to take a year. We'll time it so when the movie comes out. He got upset, all that I was going to do this. And he says, no, and we actually, I said, I actually gave him the manuscript to read. I said, I haven't even finished it, but here, read it. Now, something happened between us at that time. And what happened that I can't say for sure that this is what happened, but this is what I think has happened. Al never reads reviews of his work. And he really does it. I respect him for that, because if every good review, you're also going to get a bad review. And the bad reviews bother you. I know, because I've had books that come out and I have great reviews, and I've had some bad reviews, and I only remember the bad reviews. So I know that's true. But in this case, Al did the play Salomé in Los Angeles at the Wadsworth Theater, and it was like a reading. They did it as a reading, so they weren't dressed up in costume. They were, and the people were all reading the script. So, and the reviews were saying it was terrible, and that he sounded like Jerry Lewis and his voice, and it was just awful. However, when he finally as he did it, I met Joyce Carol Oates, one of America's leading writers.
Yeah,
I know. So I said to her, "Would you like to go see Al do this at the thing?" She said, "Oh, I'd love to." And Al had his own seats, and I had access to it. So anytime I wanted to bring somebody, as long as I didn't tell him, because he didn't want to know they were there, I could have the 2 seats. So I would call his assistant and say, "I'm bringing Joyce Carol Oates. Okay, save me 2 tickets." And this was always sold out too, so like nobody could believe I could do that. But I had that access. I had Anthony Hopkins. I said, "You want to go see Al?" "Oh yeah, I'd love to see Al do that." "Okay, can you get tickets?" "Okay." I met Gay Talese, who's a great writer, one of my favorite writers, journalist. He was at UCLA speaking, and I had never even met him, and I went up to him. I said, "Gay, I have a great admiration for your work and all." We started to talk, and I said to him, "What are you doing tonight?" And he says, "What do you mean?" I said, you feel like seeing Al Pacino? You can get tickets tonight. It's Saturday night." I said, "I think I can. Let me make a phone call." I call, I get the tickets. Gay Talese. Okay. So I'm telling you this because I bring people like Gay Talese, Joyce Carol Oates, Anthony Hopkins to this play.
Right.
After the play, I bring them backstage, and they see Al, they embrace him, they talk to him and all. Now, I am writing about all this when I get home, right? This is part of what my book is, is the whole making of this. And so my book is and then I see Joyce Carol Oates the next day. She's signing books at UCLA at the Festival of Books. And I just walk over there, and as she says, she looks at me and says, Can you believe what the LA Times wrote about Al in the play? What are they, crazy? She loved it, but she was commenting on the negative review. So I knew I wanted to write about what these really intelligent people had to say about what he did, but they were reacting to what was being written. So I had to write what some of the reviews said in the book. I had to do that. And that was fine. I think that's total legit journalism. So if you call him a clown or tell him it's terrible, then you have Gay Talese or Joyce Carol Oates saying, or Anthony Hopkins saying, "They're fools, this is great." Then it makes a better read. I think what happened is Al looked at the manuscript I gave him, like just skimmed through it, opened the page, read the review that he never read before about him being a clown, and never went on to read what the counter thing was.
Yeah.
And he got angry, and he said, "I don't want you to publish this book." And I said, "No, Al." I said, "I won't publish it with the publisher if that's how you feel, but I'm going to continue to write the book. You can't deny me my creativity." And we had a falling out over that. And the book exists. The book is called "I Want You in My Movie." And we didn't talk for a long time. Now I've recently reconnected with him. He's emailed me and texted me, and he says, "I don't know what happened, blah blah blah." But okay, I know what happened. But that's the nature of the thing. So it's a very tough divide when you are a friend of someone you are also writing about. Right. Very difficult to do it. And to me, it's like, I think it should be either or. Like I have a relationship with Diane Keaton. We become very friendly because of her, relationship with Al. And then when they split up, she hated Al for a long time because they broke up. But I remember saying to Al, "Do you mind if I write to Diane? Because I really like her. And see if I can still stay in touch with her." He says, "I don't think she'll stay in touch with you, but go ahead." But she did. I said, "Hey, Diane, why don't we play paddle tennis, just the two of us? Why don't we get together, whatever." And she agreed, and that's what happened, but I've never written about Diane in anything. Right. And it's safer that way. Yes. But, but when it comes to writing about people that you've gotten to know, like I wrote something about Elliot Gould in my book, You Talking to Me. I wrote about that story about how he influenced me. But I tell 3 things in there that he says was not true. Mm-hmm. He called me up and he said, Larry, we're friends, but what you wrote is very hurtful because it's not true. And this didn't happen that way. And I said, Elliot, it may not have happened that way, but that's the way you once told me it happened. And that's what I was writing about. But to his credit, we have still stayed friends. He hasn't got, he could have easily cut me off. Kim Basinger, on the other hand, she's like an agoraphobic. She's afraid to go out and whatever. Somehow, I've interviewed her 3 or 4 times. We've stayed friendly on the phone and email. But we talk a lot about her kids growing up, about Alec, whatever it was. But when I wrote my book, that same book, let me see if I have it here. Yeah, this one, You Talking to Me. I have a story in here about the women who talk too much about their loves. And I use Kim Basinger, how much she loved Alec Baldwin, and on and on and on. And Halle Berry, how much she loved, who was the guy she was with? No, Angelina Jolie and Billy Bob Thornton. I mean, I'll bleed for him. I'll do this. And Halle Berry was somebody else. I forget, one of the guys she was with. And they go on and on and on about how wonderful these people are and whatever. Oh, Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise. She was talking about. So that's when I had interviewed them. And I quote what they said. And then I say, she's no longer married to this one. She's no longer married to this one. She's no longer talking to that one. But, I said, I, on the other hand, am, still with the same woman for the last 40 or 50 years. And I never talk about her, in such a way. I said, I think something's, so that was what my point was about the lesson I learned, not to talk about, especially if you're a famous person, don't talk about the person you're with so much as like being the love of your life, the greatest thing, and I'll kill you if anybody bothers to hurt you. Well, Kim told me, oh, I can't wait to get your book, Larry. And she bought the book, and I have not heard from her since. And I know it's because of what I wrote in there. And I said, oh, it's a shame, But I feel I have to be true as a journalist and as a writer first. I can't protect everybody.
Right.
I'm not there to do that. If you can still stay friendly with me after I do my work, great. But don't expect me to become your personal secretary. That's not who I am.
Right. And which one of your interviews you would say was the most challenging one for you, or startling one? Something that you never expected would happen?
Well, I think Robert Mitchum, in a certain way, was a failure. I mean, I walked out. I walked out of Robert Mitchum because he was. I didn't realize that he was as anti-Semitic as he is or was, and he was just. I went to see him when he was making a movie called That Championship Season. He just wanted to meet me, so I met with him, and we went into his dressing room, and he had himself a sandwich and a drink. He didn't offer me even a water, it was just one of those things. So I could see he didn't like journalists, and I would try talking to him, and he was very belligerent. And I said, look, I've been with Marlon Brando. He didn't care. I said, Al Pacino. He didn't care. Whatever name I dropped, it didn't matter to him. And I finally said to him, Mr. Mitchum, why don't we just do an hour with the tape? And if you don't like my questions, and if you don't like me, I will give you the tape. I will walk out and I won't write anything. Now, I've never said that to anybody before or since, but I did it then because I thought, what do I have to lose? He wasn't talking anyway. He didn't want to. And he just looked at me and he said, well, that's just it, isn't it? It's that first hour. I said, I don't know what to say, Mr. Mitchum. I said, I'm just here doing my job. And he says, well, that's what Eichmann said, isn't it? I said, excuse me? He says, yeah, that's what Eichmann said. I said, are you comparing doing a Playboy interview with what Adolf Eichmann did to the Jews? He said, same thing. It's the same thing. I didn't know where to go with that. I said, Mr. Mitchum, your publicist knows how to get in touch with me. It was nice to meet you. And I walked out. And I went to see Al Pacino that day because he was at Anna Strasberg's house, Pacino, and I was meeting him for late lunch or something. And I was so upset, you know, I mean, it really was disturbing, you know, and because I walked out of a Playboy interview. I've never done that before. And Al saw it. I didn't say, he says, what's the matter? I said, oh, nothing. He says, what happened? Did you see Mitchum? I said, yeah. And I tell him the story. He says, that fucking guy, he has no right to say that to you. You know, who does he think he is? Blah, blah, blah. You've done Brando. You've done, you know, governors. You've done this. He says, you know, and it was just, he was very helpful. You know, I mean, to remind me that it wasn't my fault to walk out. I did the right thing. Whatever. Okay, a couple of years go by. I'm doing the Huston book, and I wrote to John Huston. When I was seeing John Huston, I asked John to give me a letter telling people to talk to me, and he did. And I sent a whole bunch of letters out, including one to Robert Mitchum, because he was in the Heaven Knows Mr. Allison with John and one other. And so I had an accident where it had been raining out, and I fell off a ladder, and I landed on my eye and broke my hand. My eye almost came out. I was in the hospital for a few days. I finally get home. And I'm home, and the phone rings, and I pick the phone up, and it says, "This is Larry Grobel." I said, "Yes." This is Robert Mitchum. He didn't remember me. He didn't remember me from Playboy. He said, "This is Robert Mitchum." I said, "Uh-huh." I said, "Oh, Mr. Mitchum, are you calling because of my letter from John Huston?" "That's why I'm calling." "Oh, great." I said, "Well, listen, Mr. Mitchum, I just got out of the hospital. I broke my arm." It says, "You can come tomorrow." "Okay, I'll come tomorrow." And he was in Santa Barbara. I'm in LA. And at that time, when I tell this story now, I said, why didn't I hire a cab or somebody to take me there, right? I didn't. I could. My arm was broken. Actually, it was my right arm that was broken. So I was driving left-handed all the way up 90 miles to go see him. My eye is still, you know, half out of my head. And I have to maneuver my tape recorder with my left hand and get everything and get my notes. But I do. I go see him. And we talked about John Huston, and it was fine. You know, I had a good couple of hours with him, but he never once mentioned Playboy, neither did I. so you know, he's a strange dude. But that was to me, you know, a failure, a difficult time. I was uncomfortable with him. There are people who, you know, didn't like. Chris O'Donnell wasn't that bright. Every time I'd ask him, now he's, you know, this is when he was, before he was even married, I think. Now he's got 4 kids. But Chris O'Donnell, I remember every time I'd ask him a philosophical question or a deep question, he would say, you know, my dad could answer that question. My dad could. I said, I'm not talking to your dad. I said, I'm talking to you.
Right.
Freddie Prinze Jr., I was up in his bedroom in his house, and I look around the shelves, and I didn't see a single book. And I said, where are your books? He goes, oh, I don't read books. I said, you don't read books? I said, I collect first editions. He says to me, what's that? He didn't even know what a first edition was. I said, oh my goodness. But I went with it. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, what do you read? He says, comic books. Okay, what's your favorite comic book? You know, we'll go somewhere with it. Yeah. But, you know, so some of these people can be surprising. But you know, for the most part, I mean, I once did a very famous jockey, you know, racer, horse jockey, and Willie Shoemaker, one of the most famous who ever lived. And but he didn't know how to tell what he did. I would ask him questions about riding these great horses and winning the Kentucky Derby and this, and he would say, yeah, that was really something. But I couldn't pull out of him anything more. And when I finally gave the interview to Playboy, they said, you know, your questions are better than his answers. We can't use this. And I said, you're right. I you know what I mean? I realized that was a failure, and I never published anything about Willie Shoemaker. I still have that somewhere in my drawers. So, you know, sometimes those things happen, you know. The ones that got away that I never did, because my reputation preceded me apparently, was Alfred Hitchcock, Fred Astaire, and Leonard Bernstein. All three had agreed to do the interviews. All three backed down at the very last minute. Leonard Bernstein was in Germany. I had my ticket bought. I had prepared for months to talk to him. And the day before, I get a telegram saying, Mr. Bernstein decided he doesn't want to do this, period. I wrote him a really nasty letter, but it didn't work. He didn't change his mind. Alfred Hitchcock, the day I was supposed to go see him, I get this call saying, Hitchcock doesn't want to do it. I found out later from a person I knew who was in the room with Hitchcock and that day, and he said, Hitchcock said, "Oh, I'm busy in the afternoon. I'm doing an interview for Playboy magazine. Who's your interviewer? Lawrence Grobel, whatever. Oh no, you don't want to do that. He asked too deep a questions. He's going to." Oh, really? Okay, let's forget it. And they canceled it because someone told them I asked too deep questions. Yeah. I lost that one. And then the other one was Bernstein. Oh, Fred Astaire. Would have loved to talk to Fred Astaire. I got a tuxedo. I went to the AFI, American Film Institute, a tribute to Fred Astaire. I prepared again, watched all the movies. And then what happened was his wife, she was a jockey, I think, but his wife found out that he was going to do a Playboy interview, and she didn't like Playboy. So she said, no, you're not allowed. You can't do it. And so they got back to me, the publicist says, Fred can't do the Playboy interview. But if you want to talk to him for an airline magazine, that's okay. I said, no, I don't want to talk to him from an airline magazine. That's not what I'm prepared to do. And I lost that one. So those are three I just lost, that didn't happen. And I'm always sorry they didn't, because it was a lot of preparation. It takes months to prepare for any of these things. Yeah.
And whom would you like to interview in the present times?
Well, I hate to say this because I dislike the man so much, but Donald Trump.
I knew it somehow. I've been following your posts on Facebook.
Yeah. I dislike that man so much. But the problem is I know. See, Bobby Knight, the coach, the former coach of Indiana, who got kicked out and attacked me, actually punched me when we talked. But that interview is a classic interview, and I put it at the back of my book on the art of the interview because I think it's very revealing. Yeah. But I think Donald Trump and Bobby Knight are very much alike, the way they think, who they think they are, and all that. So I think if I ever did Trump would walk out. Trump would, because I would work my way around it. With Trump, his ego is so big, you have to keep flattering him, which I hate to do, but I would. You did great things. You did, I would talk about all the greatness that he thinks he did. However, maybe with the virus, you could have done that. You'd have to sneak in your real questions in there. And eventually, he's not a stupid man. He would realize, where's this guy going? So it would be tricky. It would be tricky. But I would take the challenge. I would do that. And the same thing with some, I would not want to interview Rudy Giuliani because I think he's a fool right now, and just a vampire, a disgusting man. Jared Kushner, yeah, I could see doing him. I'm just looking at the bad guys. Ted Cruz, I just wouldn't even want to be around him. Josh Hawley, though, who was a Harvard graduate, Stanford graduate, and he's a slimy guy, I would do him because I think, he's at least got some intelligence. I'd like to see why he's, is the way he is. Actors, I'm not sure right now. Is there anybody that? Oh, Woody Harrelson. I'd like to do Woody Harrelson because I'd like to get my script to Woody Harrelson. I think he could play Marlon Brando really well. So that would be alternative motive for that one. Scientists. Well, Dr. Fauci's been interviewed so much, I don't think there's too much more to go with him. I have to think about, who else. Cormac McCarthy is a novelist. Don DeLillo. Those are two great American novelists who don't talk to people. Thomas Pynchon is still alive. Of course, if you could get to Thomas Pynchon, that would be amazing. That'd be like doing Salinger. So, I guess in every field there would be somebody that I could come up with. What athlete would I want to do? I mean, LeBron James is a great athlete, and he's got a lot of political activism going. So I think that's wonderful. Mike Tyson is sort of like he's had his time, but he's still a really interesting character. I mean, so there's people who have reached their heights and then blown it. And then come back in a different way are always interesting people.
Right.
I guess you just look for who might be really interesting. Of course, you want Charles, Prince Charles, this poor guy is never going to be king. She's going to outlive him. The Queen doesn't talk. I don't know what you get out of her, but Charles is a smart guy. But he screwed up with Diana and all this stuff. So I think Charles would be really interesting. What's her name? Angela Merkel. She's leaving. I'd love to hear. I mean, I think she really loved Obama and really hated Trump. And I'd like to get a political leader talking about that kind of stuff. That might be interesting.
Yeah.
And then the bad guys. Erdogan and Kim Jong Il. If you could get to these people, I actually get them to talk. Without. I mean, Putin. My God, what you could do with Putin if he would agree, But my condition would be that you can't. I need time. I need time. I can't do it in 10 minutes. It's not worth it. You know who I wanted to do when there were two people I wanted to do. One was Idi Amin when he was alive in Uganda, and Idi Amin was a bad man. I think he had syphilis too, but he was a crazy guy. And I said to Playboy, "Let me go. Let's see if he'll do it." And he might have, but Playboy said, he's too erratic. He could kill you. We don't want to be responsible for that. I said, well, why don't we just announce it to the New York Times or to the papers around the world that I'm going to be doing an interview with him, so we make it public. So it makes me safer. They said, no, he's crazy. You're not, he wouldn't care about that. If you ask him the wrong question, he could chop your head. So they wouldn't let me go ahead and do that one. So that didn't happen. But then I wanted to say that I had spent secret time with Elvis Presley over the years. Nobody knew. I was going to write this whole. It was going to be a hoax that I would describe how I went into the backs of things of Graceland, and we talked. And I was going to take everything Elvis ever said, so I would not make a lie out of it. But I would take all the things I could find and put questions around it and look like I did this interview with Elvis Presley. And I thought, we'll get so much reaction, and then we can reveal later. It would be so much fun to do that. And Playboy, they liked the idea for a minute, and then they said, there could ruin their reputation. So we never got to do that one.
Right.
I should have done that. I should still do that. I could do that as a book and say, just be fun to do.
Yeah. And sir, would you say that these interviews really helped you make sense of life?
I don't know if they make me, that's a hard one to say, because I think I had the sense of life with or without the interviews. I think what they've done is enriched my life a great deal. I think I always said, and I still feel that way, although I'm not doing those long interviews because I don't have an outlet anymore to do them. But I always thought, no matter what I did, if I won a jackpot and lottery, and I got somebody just won $78 million the other day. Someone's going to win 98 million today if they get. What would you do with that money? What would you do? That's insane. But even if I won $100 million and I could do anything I want for the rest of my life, obviously, I would still want to do 2 Playboy type interviews a year, because they're fascinating to do, and they take me out of me and put me into you. You know what I mean? And allow me to go in a place that no other kind of conversation allows you to go. If I meet you now, right, we're talking, and we can be very polite and everything else. But if I ask you about your sex life, you might be offended. You should be offended, right? You have no right to ask me that. Yeah. If I ask you about the money you earn, if I ask you about your taxes, if I ask you about previous, did you ever have an operation of any sort? Did you ever have an abortion? Did you ever do this? Did you ever do that? Whatever it would be, anything that's really, really personal to you.
Right.
If I brought it up, you have every right to look at me like, who do you think you are? And why are you asking me this? And please get out of my house. But if you come doing a Playboy interview and you do the same questions, they will not kick you out. They may say, I don't want to go there, but they won't kick you out and you'll continue to talk. That's the only time you can ask these kinds of questions. You know, I have been to parties or, you know, where I'd meet people. And if I start asking people, you know, what do you do? What do you do? Somebody inevitably will walk over to us and say, watch out for Larry. He's like a can opener, right? And I hate that, you know, and I realize my reputation has preceded me. I can't get away with that. So I don't do that anymore. When I meet you, I do small talk. Oh, you know, a little bit. What do you do? What do you do? But I don't go into any kind of depth because I feel it's intruding. And I feel I know how to do it. You know what I mean? So, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. And so, you know, it's a little different. But that's what I do treasure about doing those deep interviews. It gave me an opportunity to really think about the human condition, in a sense, a person's human condition, to go as far as I can with somebody and to try to shape it. You know, not just to get it, but to shape it into a life form. And that was really fascinating to me.
Right. And so being a freelance journalist, being a freelance writer, how has that empowered you? Because you did mention this element of freedom in your early days, in your childhood. How has being a freelancer really empowered you? What kind of control, as you talk about control, having that control in our interviews, how would you say that this being in this spot really helped you become a stronger journalist?
Well, I can't rate myself as a journalist. You know, I mean, I think there are a lot better journalists than I am. You know, and you know, I would never, you know, I mean, I guess as an interviewer, I am considered something special, but that's only one part of journalism, you know. I mean, you know, so but I think what the freelance life to me is the best kind of life you could live. I've always believed that because I have experienced it, and my life has been very good and it's been very rich, and I've been able to jump out of airplanes, go up in gliders, you know, hang out with Luciano Pavarotti for you know, and sit on the toilet when Al Pacino's taking a bath. I mean, I've been able to do all kinds of things as a freelance writer. That I can go to Marlon Brando's island for 10 days and then go back to the island when it's become, you know, the Brando hotel, a resort. You pay 3,000 euros a night to go there. I can go there. I've gone there twice. I don't pay to go there. They want me to come there. And then I talk about Brando. And they, you know, I mean, it's like, it's amazing. So there are certain things about being a freelance person that has allowed me to go around the world, to see the world, to be with people that I normally would never be with. You know, people enjoy my company now because I have stories about all these people. So, you know, there is something positive about all of that. You know, I can't deny any of that. And there's really nothing negative about being a freelance person except for the fact that you need to come to you're reapplying for a job every single summer. You know, you live by yourself. If an editor doesn't want your work, and you can't find another editor, you don't do it. I want to get a whatever company. This is my favorite. I would write 100 queries for idea editors. I send it to all these different magazine editors. I found that less than 10% you get rejected. like you never complained, you never discouraged me. You know, many other wives would say, you know, I want to get a new car, I want to do, I want to live differently. You know, let's travel. I would say, okay, let's travel. Let's find the money. Let's travel. Other people would say, I can do. I've stayed in some of the best hotels in the States, but I didn't pay for it all. So, you know, that's the trade-off is that when you get older, all my friends now who are retired have a, you know, money coming in from where they work. That's you know, I don't have that. I have no, you know, I've never, you know, I don't have a golden parachute. You know, I get Social Security, yeah, but you know, everything else is just still what comes out of here. You know, and when my mind starts going, so will my income. The two books I wrote, the lately is all right. This is the new one, and this one is the other one last year.
Yeah,
short story. All this book of short stories, mostly my dreams, crazy dreams I've had. You know, like so, but. It turned into story. I didn't know that I was going to be a short story writer. I never really. Now that's what I'm doing. I've written 60 stories, 35 in one and 25 in the other, that I've published. Now I've written 6 more, and I'm going to, you know, probably do another book of stories. I thought I was going to write a novel, but it looks like these stories, they just keep coming out of me. It's a great time in my life. I love writing these stories. Is anybody reading them? Very difficult. I'm not even trying to publish my stories because the magazine world has just shrunk down. It doesn't exist the way it did when I was working as much on my magazine stuff. And the short story market, you know, these small magazines, I don't know who reads them. So I just said, you know what? I'll just write them. I'll put them out myself. If anybody wants to read them, if somebody in India wants to read my work, great. If someone in Japan, you know, they're there. You know, but how does people know about them? I don't know. Maybe through you, other people will see it. You know, that'll be great because I have 29 books now. 29 books. It's, you know, I'm amazed. You know that I do, but I have the freedom to do whatever I want and to write whatever I want, and I don't have somebody telling me, "Don't do this. It's not right or it doesn't work." It works for me.
Right. So also tell us a bit about your teaching experience at UCLA.
Oh, I love teaching. I like teaching as much as I do writing. And I taught to UCLA in 2001. I was asked by the chairman of the UCLA English department to come to lunch. So I went to lunch and he said, there are 1,400 English majors at UCLA. And he's worried about what they're going to do for jobs after they graduate. If they're not going to be teachers, what are they going to do? He says, you somehow have survived an education majoring in English at UCLA, and can you teach a course on survival? That was what he asked, survival. And I said, I don't know, let me think about it. You know, I was like surprised. And I remember going back, and that afternoon I went to this tennis club that Al Pacino belonged to, and we were sitting there, and I said, hey, I just had this offer to teach at UCLA. He says, really? I said, yeah, but I don't know if I'm going to do it. He says, you got to do it. You got to do it. He says, I'll be your first guest. I said, really? He said, because I knew Al would never do that, you know, normally. Yeah, I'll come. It'll be great. I said, okay, let me come up with an idea what to teach. So I thought about all the different things I could teach, and it boiled down to the art of the interview, you know, what I've been doing. And so I came up with a plan. I gave it to UCLA. They said, okay. I put together, I said, I want to have students, they have to apply to get into the class. That was my thing. I didn't want to just have any old students. I wanted serious students. And so 60 or 70 people wrote essays, applied. I took 12 or 15 of them. And then Al Pacino came my first class. It was amazing. Wow. And so the second class, I prepared them for the first, you know, and then he came. And then I love these kids, you know, I mean, they were so smart and they were so, you know, they were so hungry. And so The very first class was so good that after the 10-week class, so many of them said, can we keep going? Can we go? So I went back to the head of the department. I said, can we do a second part of this? Can they, give credit? They said, okay. So I gave them, they were able to take the extension of the class. So I had the same students for 20 weeks, and we really got a lot done. And a lot of them are journalists now. They're all out there working. It was great, so it was a wonderful experience. And then I said, after about 2 or 3 years of just doing the art of the interview, and I was getting famous people to come. Anthony Kiedis came, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Diane Keaton, and Jaimin Hunsu, and I had publicists like Paul Block come, and I had Mike Medavoy, who was a producer, won 16 Oscars. They came, so I had very important people. Farrah Fawcett came to the class, and Steve Martin came. So the students were getting these incredible interviews with these people, and it was really wonderful. And nobody else knew about it. It was kept very. I did it at night. I had the class at night. Anyway, then I said, that every time I mention a certain writer like Ron Rosenbaum or Tom Janode or Gay Talese, or they don't know who I'm talking about. Joan Didion, Norman Mailer, they don't know their journalism. The only person they heard of was Hunter Thompson. So I said, how can you graduate English students if they don't know some of the great writers of nonfiction? So I said, why don't could I do a class on the literature of journalism? Okay, just like that. I didn't have to go before a board or anything. That was great. So I came up with a class, and I did that one. Then I came up with another one because I thought, well, how can they make money? How can students make money these days? Journalism is not going to pay everybody.
Right.
But writing for movies, writing for television, you can make a good living. How do I tie that into journalism? So I said, maybe I could do from articles to film, not books, but just anything that was a magazine article. Saturday Night Fever was all about Eve. A lot of movies became, started as magazine articles. So I found about 24 articles that I thought, that made good movies or decent movies. And I taught this class where the students, I would give them the article to read. Then I would give them then I'd show them the movie. Then I'd give them a review of the movie. And then I would ask them as a paper to compare and contrast the article to the movie. What was left in, what was left out, why. And so they got to think about it from different angles. And that was a very good class. And students loved it because they got to watch 10 movies. That was a great class. So that was the one. So that was my third class. And the fourth class was the honor department asked me, would I want to teach something in the honors department? I said, I'd love to teach a class on memoir writing, autobiography and memoir. They said, okay. So I tried that. And then I had students from all over, not just the English department, but science and, geography, whatever it was. And that was my favorite class. That became my favorite because the students write about themselves. And so I did that for 10 years. I did that till 2011. And then what happened was there was a financial crisis in the school, and they had to cut back. A lot of the departments had to cut back a lot of money. So when it came down to my seminars, UCLA had required 2 seminars that you had to take to part of your major. They decided they'll eliminate the seminars as a requirement. So that made the seminars less important. And then when they had to cut back on a few, the last one in, the last teacher in was the first teacher out. And I was one, even though I'd been there now 10 years, most of the teachers, they had been there 15, 20 years. They were, they'd been there forever, 10. So they eliminated my classes, which was such a shame. I felt I had no idea that was going to happen. And then I also found out that after you teach 10 years as a lecturer, you become a tenured lecturer. They can't get rid of you. So they had to get rid of me at that time, or they would have had to keep me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I understood that was what, I mean, that's politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in 2017, I went back to UCLA and I taught a class, an interview class actually, for the summer. And then this last summer, I taught the memoir class. I was very successful. As a matter of fact, in about 20 more minutes, 40 more minutes, I'm meeting with one of the students that was in the class that had to write her memoir, and then she got sick, so she owed it to me. So she's going to read it to me today.
Okay.
So that's been my journey with teaching. I love teaching. I would like to keep teaching. I think I have something to offer, but I got spoiled teaching at UCLA because they not only they pay well, but they gave me complete freedom. Nobody bothered. Nobody ever came to my class. Nobody asked me what I was doing. Nobody asked to see a curriculum. Nothing. And that, and now if I don't want to go through a lot of hoops, and it's the same thing. I'm very independent, and so I don't want to feel like I have to go through a lot of stuff. I know what I'm worth. I know what I can do, and I know if you give me the chance, I'll succeed. Maybe that's what it takes to be a good interviewer or a good teacher. I don't know.
Absolutely, sir. And on this note, sir, how do you look back on your journey today, and what is it that you're really looking forward to in the times to come?
Well, I guess what gives me the greatest joy right now is working with my grandson. He's 5 years old, and he's 5.5. And he had when he was 2, he had a disease. He got cancer, and it was very emotional. And my wife and I drove up. They're up in the San Francisco area, and we drove up every time he had to go through his chemo. We would try to be there, and it was a 6-hour drive, 7-hour drive to go there, and then we spend, and I'd be in the hospital with him. And he's a brave little kid, going through that from 2 to 4. He went for 2 years. The first 2 times he had these treatments didn't work. The third time, we hope it has. He's been okay since the last year and a half, thank goodness. But we don't know. But it turns out that this little kid has artistic talent, as you have seen on Facebook. It's quite striking, because I have another grandchild who is a normal 5.5-year-old who draws little figures and whatever, and it's cute, but that's what children do. They don't do portraits. They don't do what he's doing. So I'm trying to encourage it. I'm trying to, and then because of the pandemic, my daughter asked me if I would I'm Gigi. Gigi and Baba is grandpa and grandma. So I do Gigi time with him. And it's an hour and a half, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. And we draw, we sing, we dance, I read to him. He reads to me now. He's learning to read. So I get great joy out of being with him and out of knowing that I'm affecting him, hopefully in a positive way. And sometimes I'm at odds with my daughter because she says, "Don't talk to him about this. Don't tell him to do." I said, "I want you to do a cover of my book on monsters that I'm doing." And he goes, "Don't ask him to do monsters. He's having bad dreams." So we're always fighting about that. But that's one of the things that I see as part of my future is dealing with him and with my granddaughter. I want, they've just, unfortunately, because of the COVID, they moved out of LA and they moved up to Seattle. And so, it's tougher to see them. We do have these Zoom things, so that's good. And then I want to just keep writing. I have this novel that I got a National Endowment of the Arts grant for years ago, and I never finished it. I'd like to get back to it. I'm because of the stories I'm writing now, I'm saying I would like to finish another book of stories this year. So it's only January, so I'm giving myself till next December. If I can write 30 more stories, that's great. Sometimes, I've written 5 stories in a week and a half. So, sometimes it happens fast. Sometimes it takes forever. You just don't know. But it all goes well. And health for my wife and I just hope that we maintain our health, because you don't know, at our age, my legs cramp up for no reason, and where's that coming from? Or sometimes this finger is like arthritic, right? Or my thumb, they're right here. I feel it. But then I hope it doesn't get worse. I hope I can continue to write. That's all. So, life, thank God, has been a very, very good journey for me. I've traveled most of the world. I've been in Africa. I've been in Asia. I've been in, India. I've been in Japan. I've been through South America. I've been, I spent time in Colombia and Brazil. So, I can't complain about the life I've led and the people I've come in contact with. So I just hope it keeps going. And
Definitely, sir. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been such a great joy, and I have learned so much in this, 1.5 hour or 2 hour conversation, which would otherwise have taken, maybe 20 years.
First of all, you did fine. All your questions were good. And second of all, yeah, you allowed me to talk. You didn't interrupt, but I've been very honest with you.
Yes.
And I didn't hold back. So I hope that, it
that was
you.
the best part. That was the best part. And I wouldn't have got this opportunity again, sometime soon. So I had to make the most of it. I had to listen to you as much as I could, because otherwise, yes, I would also need a month or maybe 6 months to sit down with you and understand your journey. So yeah, that's how it is.
Okay.
But thank you once again. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Good luck.